This is Crossside, and I'm your host, Bryant. And in this episode, I have a good friend, Angel Mendez, joining us to discuss the topic of Marine. What do we mean by that? Well, he'll be sharing a little bit about his experience as a Marine, and we'll dive into that some more. But before we do, let me read a quote to you by retired U.S. Marine Corps four-star General James Mattis. He says, and I quote, "Demonstrate to the world there is no better friend, no worse enemy than a U.S. Marine." Nice. It's a good quote. And in fact, that quote was recommended by Angel himself. So before we dive into this, let me have him introduce himself a little bit. Tell us a little bit about yourself, bro.
Yeah, so my name is Angel Mendez, like you said. I'm married. My wife is Kristen, and we have two little children, a 4-year-old boy named Judah, and an 18-month, maybe 19 by now, month-old daughter named Gemma. Not as many as you, Bryant, but they still keep us busy. It's like
Well,
herding cats sometimes.
you're right there, man. One kid is more than enough. So the more the
Yeah,
merrier.
yep. So I work at a bus company. I drive a bus for he's actually become a good friend of mine. Actually goes to the same church I go to now.
Nice.
And that keeps me busy. My wife is a school teacher, so that's pretty much it. Church on Sundays, and during the rest of the week we're raising children and trying to be husband and wife and work and pay bills and all that other good stuff.
Good stuff, man. The good old simple life, man. That's good.
That's it.
Yes. So so why the topic of Marine or being a Marine? Uh, Mainly because I wanted to hear your story, right? I wanted to hear what your experience been like and what you can share based on that, especially as a Christian, from your Christian perspective. How can we better appreciate, understand, and consider what it's like being a Marine and all of that as it relates to our country and as it relates to you as a citizen and now a civilian, right? And but an ex-Marine as well. So yeah, if you could tell us a little bit more about that, but let's start off first by I guess defining what is a Marine.
Yeah. So a United States Marine is I think the Marine Corps like to phrase it, a basically trained soldier. So the idea behind the Marine Corps and its basic mission, if you boil it down to its bare essence, is to wage war and to win. So each Marine is trained in a certain way to be proficient with the M16 rifle that's issued to you in boot camp. And the idea being, if whether you're a cook or an administrative guy or a guy that works on tanks, if there's a war happening and the front line is losing Marines, any other Marine could step in with an M16 and fight alongside the rest of the Marines whose job it is to wage war. So that's the idea behind the Marine Corps, and that's kind of what it boils down to, that the idea of waging war for the country. And that quote that you referenced in the beginning, no greater friend or no worse enemy. Um, it's true because, the United States deploys to all these different areas around the world. And the United States is one of the few countries that abides by, the NATO rules about how to wage war and how to uh, treat the citizens of the country that you're basically invading. And so the Marine Corps has demonstrated throughout its history, it was started back in 1775, so it's actually older than the Republic itself.
Mhm.
And so, and it's been that whole thing. I think one of the presidents we had said something about winning hearts and winning minds. And there's a certain truth to that, because you don't want to be in a country sort of as just a dominating force where you're coming in and you're just tearing everything apart, destroying their way of life and things like that. Although, that does happen sometimes in war, but the Marine Corps is there to get a mission done, and it's there to help the people. And so, in its history, when those people in other countries have been supportive of the Marine Corps, who's usually the first ones to land because we're the smallest branch and can mobilize quickly because we don't have a lot of equipment like the Army does. So we get there, we do what we have to do, and then the Army comes in behind us and sort of cleans everything up with the other gear, and they can sort of maintain those prolonged wars because of their size.
Yeah.
But yeah, and no worse enemy. You think about World War II, the Marines were going through Belleau Woods in France, and that's where they got the name devil dogs, or the actual word was Teufelhunden, which is a German word for devil dogs, because as the Marines ran across the woods, very dense woods, they just scream like animals and like devils, and they're charging the enemy. And here are these Germans who are used to fighting trench warfare. All of a sudden, they see these crazy Marines coming at them, screaming, and so that's where they picked up that name, devil dogs.
Nice, man. That's good, man. Thank you for
Yeah.
some of that historical insight. So why did you become a Marine?
Yeah, so I did actually two tours. So I was in from 92 to 97. So I'm gonna be dating myself here. And then I went back in from 2005 to 2008. And my second tour was just in the Marine Corps Reserves, which is a very different animal. But the first time I went in 92, um, and keep it, both times I went in, I wasn't a believer, I wasn't a Christian. So my motivations for going in the first time were wrong, were completely wrong. Uh, I was married at the time to a different lady. We had two children at the time, and I was a young guy. I think we met when I was like 16, 17, and here I was 21, 22, feeling like I'm trapped, like, not thinking about my then wife and my two daughters at the time, just thinking I just want to, there's more to life than this. I have to get out of here and do something. So my motivation initially for going into the Marine Corps was to just disappear and go do something on my own that I felt I deserved to do. Um, so that's why I went in, and I picked the Marine Corps because I said, if I'm going to go to the military, then it's going to be, I want to go to what's perceived to be the hardest and the toughest. And so that was kind of proven when I got into the building where you sign in. I remember the four branches had the Air Force, the Army, the Navy, and the Marines. And the Air Force had about 50 something guys in line getting ready to swear in. The Navy had about, 40 something. The Army had like 30 something. And there were four of us in the Marine Corps line. So, everybody was looking at us and pointing like those crazy guys joining the Marine Corps. But that was my motivation. I really just wanted to get away, and I felt like I deserved something better. But going through boot camp, it was a serious wake up call. And that's kind of when it snapped in me like, wait a minute, you have a wife, you have two daughters, they need you. Um, Life wasn't as bad as you thought it was with them. And so, I kind of credit the Marine Corps, at least going through that 3 month boot camp, to just waking me up and saying, look, this is important what you're doing here in boot camp, but there's something that's more important. That was my family at the time. So that was my reason. But right after boot camp, they sent me to a year-long school. So that was another year that I was away from home. It was electronics, so I was learning how to work on switchboards and telephones. And then they sent me after that another year away to Okinawa. So I was altogether away from home for like 2.5 years almost. And my wife at the time waited, and my two daughters continued to grow. Actually, one of them was born while I was in boot camp. So I went home for a little bit, got to see them, and then I was off again. So that was the reason. And I didn't go in, I wasn't as hardcore as I thought. I wanted to join the Marine Corps, but I also didn't want to be a grunt. Those are the guys that all they do is train for war 24/7. And their life is pretty hard because that's all they're doing. So mine was a little more cushy. I got to work with electronic gear and, got to do some of the training the Marines do, but not as intense.
Nice.
So wrong
And so,
motivations.
yeah, so I was gonna ask in light of that, like, do you think a lot of guys go in with those types of motivations?
Yeah, I do. A lot of guys, interestingly enough, most of the guys that I knew in the Marine Corps were from the southern states. Um, and a lot of them said they just came in because they just wanted to get away from mom and dad. These were younger guys. I was a little older when I was in my early 20s, like 22, 23. But these guys were 18, just getting out of high school, and they just wanted to get away from mom and dad, most of them said. And they didn't want to stay in their small towns working at their dad's hardware store or anything like that. So that was the reason a lot of them got in it. And then some guys were just bored. Some guys were ex drug addicts, and they're like, I'm tired of this. I just want to leave this life and go into the Marine Corps and do something with my life. So a lot of them were seeking a reason, seeking some kind of purpose for living. That's what it
Yeah.
boils down to.
And do you think the Marine Corps they offer that? They offer that purpose, perhaps that some of them are looking for, or at least to some extent. What was your take on that?
Yeah, I think they do, because the Marine Corps has they have all these little terms that they throw at you, and one of them was esprit de corps, and that was the spirit of the Marine Corps. So they work hard at instilling in you, especially in boot camp and basic training, um, that you're a band of brothers. You know, that Marines never leave another Marine behind. That when you're in combat, the guy to your right and the guy to your left are the two guys that matter the most. And so every guy has that feeling. You all come in as, filthy civilians, like they say, and they transform you into Marines. And it's the only branch of the United States military armed forces that you carry that title. You go into the Army, you don't become an Army, you become a soldier. Same thing with the Air Force. You don't become an Air Force, you become an airman. And the Navy, you become a sailor. But the Marines, you become a Marine. And so there's that pride, there's the history, there's the knowledge of, you go in first when combat happens. You're the first ones that go. Um, and so all these things that they instill in you, from learning how to march in boot camp, from the way you wear your uniform with pride, all those little things, and you're all receiving that same training. So you come out of there and you feel like, you go home and you try to explain to your family, well, this is what happened in boot camp. We marched and we did this, and everybody kind of looks at you like, yeah, with a blank stare, because they really weren't there. They don't get it. But you look at the Marines that you graduated with, and you're like, these guys, they get it, and so it does feel like it is a family, and you all
Yeah.
have the same mission. So yeah, I think it does, to that extent, accomplish that.
Nice, nice. And if you want to further elaborate on this, so how was your experience as a Marine? You kind of touched on it briefly, but if you want to dive a little more into that.
Yeah. So, my experience as a Marine, like I said, I went. My first duty station was out in Okinawa, Japan. So I was, on the other side of the planet. Um, what I found with me, initially was, as you once you graduate boot camp, you go into the Fleet Marine Corps. So you're assigned a unit. You report to your unit, and then you're assigned your duties. Well, as you get there, you're kind of the lower rank guy, so it's tough in the beginning because it's not boot camp. No one's yelling at you and screaming at you like they did in boot camp. They're treating you like an adult, but at the same time, you're bearing the brunt of all the workforces. So whenever anything needs to get done, it's the privates and the PFCs and the lance corporals. Those are the first three ranks. And you guys get to do everything. So initially it was hard, and I was missing home. Like I said, I was away from my wife at the time and my two daughters. And so all I kept thinking about was, man, I can't wait till this is over and I get home. I signed up for 5 years, so it seemed like it was a long way off. But at the same time, you meet so many uh, good guys, that you kind of have a lot in common with. You learn their backstory, they learn yours. You hang out after work, because it's kind of like, when I was in, it was like a job. Since we worked on electronic equipment, we had I don't want to say 9 to 5, but it was kind of that time frame. And so the evenings were yours, the weekends were yours, and so we hung out, we did things together. Um, so it was a good experience. But all in the back of my mind the whole time was, man, I really miss my family. The people that I wanted to get away from were the ones that my heart kept calling back to. Man, I just want to see them. I want to hug my daughters. I want to hug my wife. So um, that was the hardest thing, but it was an interesting experience. Especially when we got to do, as electronics guys. When we had a gunnery sergeant, who's like an E6, and he came into our unit, and he knew a lot. He had a lot of connection to the Marine Corps. So he would hook us up with some of those grunt units, and we did all kinds of helicopter training and training in the mountains and stuff like that. That was always fun because you don't ever do that kind of stuff in real life. So, and getting to know the tactics that the Marine Corps uses. Of course, we just did it for training, but the whole time I kept thinking, man, it would be a totally different feel if this was your job and you were deployed to a combat field and you were doing this kind of stuff. So whenever I met those guys, there was always like a respect that other Marines paid those guys, because they've been there and they've done it. And you could always tell the guys that actually did combat fighting, because they never talked about it much. The guys that came back from overseas, oh, I did this and I killed so many Iraqis, or whatever the case may be. Those guys usually were just lying. They didn't do anything. The guys that were quiet and reserved, and they couldn't. One guy started to tell me one time about his experience in Iraq, And after about two sentences, he just completely shut down and, wouldn't say anything anymore. He just said, I don't want to talk about it. So, there's respect, and there's a sense of realness, because you realize, this is fun when you're training, but when these guys get deployed, a lot of them don't come back the same. Seeing the things that they see and experiencing the things that, having to kill probably another human being, changes a person. So I'm thankful to God that I didn't see those kinds of things. Although when I went in, that was I'm ready to do whatever they tell me to do. Combat, Vietnam again, whatever it is, I'm going. But in hindsight, I'm really grateful that I didn't experience those things.
Yeah, for sure, man. That's good. So, remind us again, where did you serve?
Yeah. So Okinawa, first I went to boot camp. I did a boot camp basic training in San Diego. And there's this little rivalry that goes on, because there's Marine Corps has two basic training facilities. One is in the East Coast, which is Paris Island, which is where most of the Marine Corps movies take place, on Paris Island. And then you have San Diego is the other recruit depot, they call it. And that's where I trained. And so the uh, the East Coast would always call us the Hollywood Marines, because we were out in California, but in reality we all got the same training. So I did boot camp in San Diego, and then my schooling was in 29 Palms, California, which is a desolate, remote place in California. It's literally a desert. It used to be an army base, I think for World War II, where they kept a lot of the Japanese prisoners. And then the army abandoned it, and the Marine Corps, usually that's what happens. The Marine Corps gets whatever they leave behind. And so it became one of our bases, and it became our communications and airfield, where guys get trained for avionics and electronics and stuff like that. So I spent a year there. Then I got to go home for like 7 days, and then they sent me to Okinawa for a whole year. And then after Okinawa, that was the end of my like 2.5 year mark. They sent me to Camp Pendleton, back to California. Uh, Camp Pendleton is near San Diego, the southern part of California. And I was there for my last 3 years in the Marines. And then I got out for 8 years. 9/11 happened, and something inside of me clicked. And I was like, I knew Marines that were still in it, some friends of mine. And I said, I got to go back in. Crazy, I know. But my family was
Mhm.
like, why? You already served your time. You don't have to go. No, you don't understand. I have to go back in. Again, I wasn't a believer at the time. So I was looking for that meaning, for that purpose, something to give my life meaning. So I went back in, spoke to a recruiter. But since I had a family this time, I knew what it meant to leave them for so long. So I went reserves this time. So I got to stay at home and just went on the weekends, and then a couple months out of the summer. That was from 2005, 2008. And most of my training was at Great Lakes Naval Station up in, I think it's Waukegan. So not that far, a little north from us.
Yeah, nice. So now that you look back as a Christian, what are your thoughts? How has your perspective changed how you view your past experience and your service as a Marine?
Yeah. Well, interesting. While I was in the Marine Corps the first time, when I was on active duty from 92 to 97, I began to listen to Christian radio. There was a big evangelist. He's still around, Greg Laurie, big
Yeah,
evangelist in California. I even went to one of his crusades. Excuse me. Went down, walked the aisle, prayed the prayer, did all of that. But I knew I wasn't, even though I did that, I knew that I wasn't saved, because there was zero change in my life. I didn't have a love for the word of God. I didn't have a love for the people of God. None of that. And so um, I was constantly listening to Christian radio, but my life was 180 degrees different than what a Christian life should be. And that was because of the influence of the Marine Corps. You're Marines, you go out on the weekends, you get drunk, you do this, you go to the clubs, all that entails, right? Um, and so when I was away from home, even though I was missing my wife and my children, I was enjoying quote unquote those types of things with other Marines. And I saw other Marines who came in as Mormons, very serious Mormons. You grew up in Utah, that area, and their whole life they were in the Mormon church. Um, and I knew other actual Protestant Christians, as well as some Catholics, that as they went to the Marine Corps, they sort of abandoned their faith. Um, so I always found that interesting, and it's because of the influence that you have an influence in the Marine Corps of being a devil dog, of being a hard charger, the world's elite. These are all the things that they're always telling you.
Right.
We take what we want. We go to combat and we win. And so all these things go in your head, and it just pride just swells in you, and you think you can do whatever you want. So it was never a good place to be a Christian if you were a Christian, because of all the negative influence that you have bombarding you, day in and day out.
Real quick, what role did the chaplain play, if anything, if you guys had one, and were you ever around other believers, like
Yeah, we did.
legit committed believers?
Yeah, I actually met maybe one the entire time that I was in there, who was a legitimate believer. I met a couple guys in a cult, the Church of Christ, that almost kind of drew me in. You had to be baptized to be saved and all that. Um, but I think I met one who was pretty, I would say he was a pretty solid, pretty faithful Christian. And he lived it. I mean, when we were around Marines and Marines are together, they have filthy mouths, filthy language. He was never that. He was never part of the jokes. If people, I would always notice if things like that came up when Marines were around, he would just kind of quietly walk away, wouldn't take part in it, would go to church on Sundays, would even try to talk to you, would even try to share the gospel and talk to you about Christ and why he lives the way he lives. But I really didn't have much interest. I would politely listen, but I wasn't really interested. So my whole time there, he was probably the one guy that I remember that, he was actually living it. And I'm sure there were others, but since I didn't really move in those circles,
Yeah.
I never met him. But I know a lot of guys who were lukewarm Christians. They went to church, but then, the rest of the week, you couldn't tell they were Christian.
Yeah.
So it wasn't a very, it was an easy place not to be a Christian if that's what you wanted to do.
Right. It's not conducive to that. to
Exactly.
to, to
Exactly.
one's sanctification.
Right. Right.
Or then again, I guess it can be for some, right? Those that are serious and committed followers of Christ. God gives them the grace by His Spirit to, even in those contexts, to be a witness and to promote the gospel and to still remain faithful
That's
and
right.
follow Jesus, even in the midst of so much temptation and such negative influence, peer pressure, and all of that. I'm sure,
Yeah.
but yeah, definitely not
You did
conducive.
mention about chaplains. Funny, the
Yeah,
only
yeah,
time I actually saw a chaplain was in boot camp, because in boot camp they made us go to service. And so
okay,
having
like a
grown up a
chapel.
Catholic, yeah, so you either go to Protestant service or Catholic service. And so having grown up a Catholic, I identified going into the Marine Corps as a Catholic.
Yeah,
And so I would go to the Catholic services on Sundays. They made you go. And I later found out is because that's the only time the drill instructors got a little free time away from all the recruits, a few hours away from them to do what they needed to do. Um, but in the Marine Corps itself, excuse me, I didn't really, I know they were there, and they're always naval. They go through the Navy to become through their chaplaincy program. So they were always naval chaplains, and I would see them sometimes around base, but never had any interaction with any of them.
yeah, yeah. Interesting. So how has your experience now, looking back? We talked a little bit about that, but how has it shaped you now
Yeah.
as a man, as a husband, as a father, even to some extent as a Christian, even?
Hmm.
Uh,
Yeah. Well, as Christians, as believers, there's certain roles that the Bible lays out and expects from men, and there's certain roles and specifics that the Bible lays out that it's expected from women. So there's different roles, right? Uh, Complementarianism, right? So going through the Marine Corps, I grew up in a family with there were five of us, two brothers, two sisters, and I was the middle child, and it was just my mom. My dad was they got divorced. He was an abusive guy, just a bad guy. And so my mom left him when we were little kids. I don't even have any memories of him. So my older brother kind of stepped up to that role. He was very strict. He'd get his clothes ready for school, and he was neat, clean. He made sure we were inside the house from playing outside at a certain time. And so I got to see some of what it meant to be a man through my older brother. But my mom, she was just kind of like that old Puerto Rican, loving. She cooked for her kids, uh, washed their clothes, got us up in the morning, got us to school, but wasn't much of a disciplinarian. But luckily we weren't really bad kids when I look back. We didn't give her much of our time. But in the Marine Corps, you learn a lot of discipline. you learn that one thing they told you, like whenever there's two Marines in a room, one of them is always a leader. If you both have the same rank, it doesn't matter. One of you picked up the rank before the other guy. And if you both got it on the same day, if you both picked up that rank on the same day, it doesn't matter because one of you got the rank pinned on your collar right before the other guy. So that would make you technically the leader. And so they were just always trying to instill in you that Marines lead, and you're disciplined. There's things that you have to do, you get them done. If you tell someone you're going to be there at 9 o'clock, then you show up at 8:45, always early, never late. So there's a lot of little things that I learned in the Marine Corps in terms of the way I carry myself, in terms of, being a man of your word, uh, being on time when you say you're going to be on time, doing what you say you're going to do, little things like that you pick up, being organized, um, all these little types of things that have actually translated well into my Christian walk because there I am a father, I am the leader of my home. Insofar as I submit to Christ, I want my wife to submit to me, my children to submit to me, but they need to see a father who loves Christ first, right? I'm the representative in the house of that role. So um, all those little things that I picked up in the Marine Corps in terms of leadership and discipline, those types of things have actually translated well and have actually helped me, even in terms of employment. Always there early, don't miss work. Um, Honesty, tell my boss, I'm doing exactly what I say I'm doing. So things like that, and a lot of that was actually shaped and molded in me in the Marine Corps. So it has helped me in that way, and it's also given me a sense of pride. I mean, I'm a Christian first, but I love this country. There's no other country in the world that I'd rather live in. The United States of America. When you look at where most people go to, they come to this country. And so there's a sense of pride knowing that uh, I served the country. For 5, 8 years with reserves. So there's all those little characteristics that were, I would say, instilled in me that I think transfer well into your role as a Christian father and husband and brother and son.
And Christian Marine.
And Christian Marine. That's right.
That's good, man. Good stuff. So here, as we are beginning to wrap this up, what would you say to someone who wants to be a Marine? Like, what would your
Yeah,
counsel, your advice be to someone?
it's interesting. This is probably going to go sound contrary to everything I said, but my first counsel would be don't do it. That would be my first counsel. Only because the world is in the stage that it's in. It's kind of dark right now. It's the Marine Corps doesn't. It's like when you send a kid off to college, even if they grew up in a Christian home, they go off to college and they experience this freedom. They're out from under the protection and the discipline of their mother and father, and that's not good for some kids. They tend to be influenced by all that's bad, all that's negative. And in the Marine Corps, I say that's exponentially more so because of all that's into all the freedom that you have. You get to fire a weapon, you're defending your country. There's so much responsibility that's placed on you as a Marine, and there's so much freedom that's given to you that I would say try to think of something else to do. That would be my first counsel. But if they felt like, no, this is what I have to do, then I would probably say maybe go to the Air Force. It's not as crazy as the Marine Corps. And you can still get some college money. You can go to school while you're in the military. If I was smart, I would have done that, and they would have paid for it while I was there. You come out with a degree and military experience and not owing a dime. Um, but if they still insist that it's the Marines, then I would say, if the person is not a Christian, then there's really not much you could say in terms of, it's going to be a negative experience. You got to watch out for, these negative experiences because they're in that culture, right? They're in that world. But if the person is a Christian, I would just recommend the Marine Corps is a great experience. But what you want to do right off the bat upon graduating boot camp is seek out other believers. Seek out a church. If you're in an area in a city where there's churches, seek out the chaplain, but get plugged in right away with other believers to hold yourself accountable. You can still be a Marine and do a lot of the fun things Marines do without going down, a bad path. So that would be my experience, my counsel to a Christian kid thinking of going into the Marine Corps.
Good, man. Good. Thank you for sharing that. And one last thing now, as we close this episode, could you give us and the listeners like a takeaway, something that you want the listeners to walk away with from this discussion, from your experience, your insight, from what you shared so far?
Yeah. A couple things. I think, first of all, I would say that, I mean, I know this was a brief conversation and it's kind of hard to get a feel for, because I didn't really talk about what it's actually like to be in the Marine Corps, what a daily experience is and stuff like that, because we could be here forever. But I think the first thing I would say is, I hope that for those people that have never, heard from anyone in the military or talked to anyone in the military, that this kind of gives them some new ideas that they've never thought about. And that when they see a military, if they see someone in uniform or they see a veteran or something, man, I always tend, even though I served, I always go up and say, hey, thank you for your service. That's so much appreciated by these guys and women.
Yeah.
When they hear stuff like that, knowing that, I'm doing something for my country. And it's nice when the civilian folk just say hi or, hey, thank you for your service or something simple like that. So I would say that that's the first thing, just sort of, if you don't already, try to learn to appreciate, that these guys are out there and they can put their life in danger at any given moment. So thank them for that when you see them. The second thing I would say is, if you're a believer, no matter where you are in the world, no matter what you're doing in the world, your battle is always going to be the world, the flesh, and the devil, right? So you're always going to have that three-pronged attack coming at you, whether you're in the Marine Corps or whether you're, working at McDonald's or Target or in some office somewhere downtown. So prayer is key, no matter where you are. You got to constantly be in prayer, constantly be in the Word of God, getting that word into you, meditating on the word, memorizing scripture. When I was at Armitage, there were a lot of guys would like to say, make sure you're all prayed up, right? And so that's very true. Just be on your knees and always remember that no matter what you do, you're a Christian first, if you are a Christian, and everything else is secondary. So I would say that. And thirdly, if you're a veteran and you haven't really had an experience from other people telling you, thank you for your service or anything like that, just know that there are people out there that do appreciate what you've done. And if they've never verbalized it, just be 100% certain that we do appreciate you and we're glad that you served. And that's it.
Good stuff, man. Well put. Thanks, man. I appreciate your wisdom and your time and sharing a little bit of your experience. And yeah, definitely, we could have gotten a little more into all of that if you wanted to. I don't know if you still want to, or maybe we could save it for another time. But yeah, thanks for joining me as well for this episode and for sharing a little bit about yourself. And also, thank you, like you were pointing out, for your service, man. Appreciate your service for the country. And yeah, hopefully, we wish, especially nowadays in our culture, that people would show a little more respect to those who have served or are serving. And also even, we just had Memorial Day. So just remembering those who served and are no longer with us. So
they paid the ultimate price. That's right.
They sure did, man. So that we can have the freedom to have these conversations.
There you go. Right? There you go.
So, yeah, man. So thanks again for all of that. And I also want to thank our listeners for listening in and checking this episode out. This will be all for this episode. And have a good night. Peace.